$50,000, I said, placing the stack of cash on the coffee table between us. Half now, half when I get the green card. Non-negotiable. The man sitting across from me, Ethan Russell, according to the mutual friend who'd arranged this meeting, raised an eyebrow. His apartment was exactly what I'd expected from a 28-year-old American musician. Mismatched furniture, band posters on the walls, dishes in the sink visible from where we sat. A guitar stood in the corner beside an amplifier covered in stickers. And if something goes wrong? If they deny your application? His voice was deeper than I'd anticipated, with a slight southern accent I couldn't place precisely. They won't. I've researched extensively. My paperwork is immaculate. I straightened my already straight tie. The only variable is you, Mr. Russell. Ethan, he corrected, leaning back into the worn couch. If we're getting married, you probably shouldn't call me Mr. Russell. His casual demeanor irritated me. This wasn't a joke. It was my future. My entire academic career hung by a thread, and his nonchalance felt disrespectful. This is a business arrangement, I reminded him. Nothing more. We learn enough about each other to convince immigration officials live together for the required period, then divorce once I receive permanent residency. 2 years of your life for $50,000. He studied me for a long moment, those startlingly blue eyes taking in my pressed shirt, polished shoes, the rigid way I held myself on the edge of his second-hand armchair. You know, he said finally, when Kevin mentioned a friend needed help with immigration issues, this isn't what I pictured. What did you picture? I don't know. Maybe filing some paperwork, writing a letter of support. He gestured to the money. Not a cash for marriage proposition from Wei Zhang, I supplied. And if there were simpler solutions, I would pursue them. My student visa expires in 2 months. My funding was cut due to department budget issues. Without an H-1B sponsor or family connection, marriage is the only viable path to remain in the country. I tried to keep the desperation from my voice. I'm 1 year from completing my Ph.D. in biochemical engineering. I can't leave now. Something in my tone must have registered because his expression softened slightly. That's rough, man. He ran a hand through his already disheveled brown hair. But marriage fraud is a serious crime. We could both face fines, deportation for you, prison time for me. Only if we're caught. Which we won't be. I leaned forward. I've prepared extensively. We'll have photos, correspondence, joint accounts. We'll learn everything about each other. It will be convincing. $50,000, he repeated, eyeing the cash. I knew from Kevin that Ethan's band was struggling, that he worked multiple part-time jobs to make rent. I was counting on his financial situation to outweigh his moral qualms. After what felt like an eternity, he extended his hand. I'm probably going to regret this, but deal. I stood and shook his hand firmly. Thank you. I'll have the paperwork ready tomorrow. We should be married by the end of the month. Wow, not even dinner first? He smiled, showing a slightly crooked front tooth that somehow suited him. Most guys at least buy me a drink before proposing. I didn't return the smile. This isn't a romantic comedy, Mr. Russell. It's a legal transaction with significant risks. I suggest we keep things professional. Right. His smile faded. Professional. Got it. As I gathered my briefcase to leave, I tried to ignore the twinge of guilt. Ethan seemed decent enough, if frustratingly casual. But I couldn't afford to see him as a person with feelings and complications. He was a means to an end. My green card, my academic future, everything I'd worked toward since coming to America 5 years ago. What I didn't realize then was that Ethan Russell would become far more than a transaction, and that our carefully constructed fraud would ultimately force me to confront the most authentic truth about myself. The courthouse wedding was brief and sterile, exactly as I'd planned. We wore suits. Ethan had borrowed his and it hung slightly too large on his frame, exchanged plain bands, and hired Kevin and his girlfriend as witnesses. The justice of the peace looked bored as she pronounced us married. No one threw rice. No one took photos, though I knew we'd need to stage some later for evidence. So, Ethan said as we stood awkwardly on the courthouse steps afterward, "Now what, husband?" The word made me flinch. "Now we begin establishing our partnership. I've rented a one-bedroom apartment near campus. You'll move in next weekend." "Wait, one bedroom? Where will I sleep?" I sighed. "The couch converts to a bed. Immigration officials may visit unannounced. We need to appear to be a legitimate couple." "Right." He nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "And, how long do we need to live together?" "Approximately 18 months. I can apply to remove conditions after 2 years of marriage, but we should separate before that to establish grounds for an amicable divorce." He let out a low whistle. 18 months is a long time to live with a stranger, Wei. Which is why we won't remain strangers. I've prepared questionnaires for us both to complete. Family history, childhood memories, preferences, habits, everything a couple would typically know about each other. I checked my watch. "I have a lab meeting. The movers will deliver your things on Saturday. Here's the address and keys." He accepted them with a bemused expression. "Aren't you forgetting something?" I frowned. "What?" "This." Before I could react, he leaned forward and pressed a quick, dry kiss to my lips. When he pulled back, he looked vaguely amused at my shocked expression. "Practice, husband. Better get used to it if we're going to be convincing." I touched my lips involuntarily, feeling oddly disoriented. "That won't be necessary very often. Public displays of affection aren't typical in Chinese culture. But they are in American culture, especially between newlyweds." His expression turned serious. "Look, if we're doing this, we need to be convincing. That means occasional touching, using terms of endearment, knowing how to act like people who chose to marry each other." He was right, which annoyed me further. "Fine. We'll discuss appropriate parameters of physical contact. Now, I really must go." As I walked away, I could feel his eyes on my back. My lips still tingled slightly from that brief contact. My first kiss with a man, not that Ethan needed to know that. Another complication in an already complex situation. Living with Ethan proved more challenging than I'd anticipated, but not for the reasons I expected. I'd worried he would be messy, irresponsible, disruptive to my careful routines. He was indeed somewhat disorganized, leaving coffee mugs on the counter and draping clothes over furniture. But he was also surprisingly considerate, keeping his music to headphones when I was studying, cooking actual meals instead of the instant ramen I subsisted on, remembering details from our relationship questionnaires without prompting. The real challenge was maintaining emotional distance while sharing such intimate space. "Morning, sunshine," he called from the kitchen one Saturday, a month into our arrangement. I emerged from the bedroom, which we'd agreed was mine except when we had visitors, to find him making breakfast wearing only pajama pants, his hair still rumpled from sleep. "I've asked you not to call me that," I said, averting my eyes from his bare chest as I poured myself coffee. "I know, but Wei feels too formal, and husband makes you flinch." He flipped a pancake with surprising dexterity. "Besides, we need pet names for authenticity. Immigration officers eat that stuff up." "Is that based on your extensive experience with immigration fraud?" I regretted the words immediately as his expression fell. "No, it's based on having actual relationships," he said quietly. "Something you might want to research alongside your immigration regulations." The rebuke stung because it was true. At 30, I'd had exactly 2 relationships, both with women, both brief and unsatisfying. I'd attributed this to being focused on my studies, on my 5-year plan that would lead to a prestigious research position and eventually bringing honor to my family back in Beijing. I'd never acknowledged the possibility that my romantic failures might have other causes, that perhaps women weren't what I truly wanted. "I apologize," I said stiffly. "That was uncalled for." Ethan's smile returned, though slightly dimmed. "Apology accepted. Now eat your pancakes before they get cold. We have that dinner with my bandmates tonight, remember? Time to practice being besotted newlyweds." The dinner was my first real test of our charade. Ethan's bandmates, Ryan on bass, Miguel on drums, and Sarah on keyboards, were clearly curious about the husband Ethan had never mentioned until he suddenly announced his marriage. "So how'd you two meet?" Sarah asked as we sat crowded around a table at their favorite bar, pizza and pitchers of beer between us. We'd rehearsed this, at least. "At the university library," I answered. "I was researching, and Ethan was hiding from the rain," he finished, sliding an arm casually around my shoulders. "Forgot my umbrella, ducked into the nearest building, spotted this gorgeous, serious guy frowning at a textbook like it had personally offended him." His bandmates laughed, and I forced a smile, hyper-aware of the weight of his arm, the warmth of his body next to mine. "Love at first sight?" Ryan teased. "More like annoyance at first sight," Ethan replied, his thumb absently stroking my shoulder in a way that made it difficult to concentrate. Wei thought I was disturbing his concentration, called me disruptive to the academic environment. "That does sound like Wei," Miguel chuckled, and I realized with surprise that they'd already formed an impression of me based on whatever Ethan had told them. "So what changed?" Sarah pressed. Ethan looked at me, eyebrows raised slightly, letting me take this part of our fictional story. "He was persistent," I said, meeting his gaze. "Kept showing up with coffee, asking questions about my research even though biochemical engineering couldn't possibly interest a musician." "Hey, I found it fascinating," Ethan protested, and for a moment I almost believed our own fiction, that he had pursued me, that I had gradually warmed to him, that we had fallen in love despite our differences. "The real question," Sarah said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "is how did a super-serious academic end up married to our Ethan, who once tried to pay his rent and guitar lessons?" An uncomfortable silence fell as I struggled to formulate a response that would sound authentic. Ethan squeezed my shoulder. "He saw something in me that most people don't bother looking for," he said softly, his eyes still on mine. "Beyond the mess and the noise. And I saw past his walls to the passion underneath all that discipline. Right, sunshine?" His expression was so sincere that for a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember what was real and what was fabricated. I swallowed hard. "Right," I managed, "exactly that." Later, walking back to our apartment in the crisp autumn air, I found myself troubled by how natural it had felt to play the role of Ethan's husband. How easily his friends had accepted our relationship despite its improbability. "You did great," Ethan said, breaking into my thoughts. "They completely bought it." "Your friends are very accepting," I observed. "They did seem surprised that you married a man." He shrugged. "They know I'm bisexual. Have been since high school." He glanced at me. "What about you? Does your family know you're—" "I'm not," I said quickly. Too quickly. "This is a practical arrangement, nothing more." His expression was unreadable in the streetlight shadows. "Right. Practical." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Just making conversation." We walked the rest of the way in silence, a new tension between us that I told myself was simply the strain of maintaining our deception. Over the next several months, our lives settled into an unexpected rhythm. Ethan found work as a music teacher at a local school, supplementing his band gigs. I continued my research, pushing toward the dissertation defense that would complete my doctoral program. We became experts in the details of each other's lives. His childhood in Tennessee with divorced parents, my strict upbringing as an only child in Beijing. His favorite food, his grandmother's fried chicken, my preferred study music, Bach cello suites, his allergies, cats, penicillin, my childhood dream to win the Nobel Prize. What surprised me was how often we found points of connection beneath our obvious differences. We both had complicated relationships with our fathers. We both found solace in creation, his music, my research. We both felt like outsiders in different ways. "Do you ever miss China?" he asked one night as we sat on our small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine after dinner. "Sometimes," I admitted. Not the pollution or the pressure, but certain moments. Lantern festivals. My mother's jiaozi. The sense of being understood without explanation. He nodded. I get that. When I visit Tennessee, I still feel this immediate relaxation, like I can breathe differently there. But I also remember why I left. Which was, being the weird bisexual kid who cared more about Kurt Cobain than football didn't exactly make me popular. He smiled ruefully. My dad still introduces me as his son who does music stuff instead of having a real job. My father wanted me to study business, I confessed. Engineering was a compromise. He still asks when I'll stop playing with chemicals and join a respectable company. Parents, Ethan sighed, raising his glass in a mock toast. Can't live with them. Can't convince them your life choices are valid? I laughed, surprising myself. These moments had become increasingly common. Conversations that flowed naturally, jokes that weren't part of our cover story, genuine connection beyond our arrangement. We should take photos, I said suddenly, remembering our evidence collection. For the immigration file. Always the romantic, he teased, but pulled out his phone. Come here, husband. I moved my chair closer, stiffening slightly when he wrapped an arm around me and held the phone up for a selfie. Relax, he murmured. Look like you actually like me. I tried to smile naturally, but felt awkward and posed. Here, he said, lowering the phone. Let's try something. Before I could ask what, he began telling me about his first disastrous band performance when he'd split his pants on stage while attempting a rock star jump. The story was so ridiculous, his telling so animated, that I found myself genuinely laughing. Thus when he quickly raised the phone again and captured the moment, me with my guard down, smiling unreservedly, looking at him with genuine affection. There, he said softly, showing me the photo. Now that looks real. I stared at the image, barely recognizing myself. I looked younger, more open, my eyes crinkled with laughter, my body angled toward Ethan's as if drawn by gravity. Keep taking them, I said, my voice oddly rough. We need a believable collection. And so our photo album grew, cooking together in the kitchen, walking in the park, attending his band's performances, even a staged anniversary dinner for our supposed dating milestone. In each image, the line between performance and reality seemed to blur a little more. 6 months into our marriage, we received notice of an interview with Immigration Services. Despite my careful preparation, panic seized me. They're going to separate us, I told Ethan, pacing our small living room. Ask us questions independently to see if our answers match. If we fail, I'll be deported. You could face criminal charges. Way? Ethan caught my arm, stopping my frantic movement. Breathe. We've got this. We know more about each other than most real couples do after 6 months. Knowledge isn't enough. We need to appear genuinely in love. My voice broke slightly on the word love, a concept I deliberately avoided examining too closely. Then we practice, he said simply. Not just facts, but how we act together. Body language. The small things that people who love each other do automatically. And so we began a new phase of our deception, deliberate physical contact, casual intimacy, the choreography of a relationship. Ethan taught me how his previous partners had touched him. A hand at the small of the back, fingers brushing while passing objects, the lean of bodies toward each other in conversation. I was a reluctant student at first, each touch feeling forced and unnatural. But gradually, something shifted. I found myself reaching for his hand without thinking, adjusting his collar automatically, responding to his presence like a plant to sunlight. That's it, he encouraged one evening as we practiced entering a room as a couple. You're not just tolerating my touch now, you're expecting it. His approval shouldn't have mattered, but I found myself craving it nonetheless. The night before our interview, we stayed up late reviewing details, quizzing each other on family members' names, first date specifics, household habits. Which side of the bed do I sleep on? Ethan asked. The right. You claim the left is too close to the window and gets drafty. What medication am I allergic to? Penicillin. You discovered this at age 7 with a dramatic rash that your mother initially mistook for chickenpox. He smiled. My favorite breakfast? Coffee with ridiculous amounts of sugar and anything involving bacon. I returned his smile. My turn. What do I do when I'm stuck on a research problem? You run your hand through your hair until it stands up, then make green tea and stare out the window without blinking until the solution comes to you. I hadn't realized he'd noticed that. The name of my childhood pet? Trick question. Your parents didn't allow pets, which is why you secretly adopted a stray cat named Xiao Mao that you kept in a neighbor's yard for 3 months before your father discovered it. Impressive, I acknowledged. What am I most afraid of? I'd expected him to say spiders or heights, both true, but superficial fears I'd mentioned on our questionnaires. Instead, he looked at me thoughtfully. Disappointing your family, he said quietly. Living a life that doesn't justify their sacrifices. Being ordinary. The accuracy of his assessment left me momentarily speechless. And maybe also spiders, he added with a gentle smile. I swallowed hard. We should practice kissing, I said abruptly, for authenticity. His eyebrows rose. Are you sure? You've been pretty clear about physical boundaries. Immigration officers notice these things. A couple who's been married 6 months should be comfortable with physical affection. I was speaking too fast, too formally, a sure tell of my nervousness. Okay, he said carefully. How do you want to do this? Rather than answer, I moved closer to him on the couch, awkwardly placing my hands on his shoulders. He remained still, watching me with those clear blue eyes that somehow always saw too much. Relax, he murmured. We've done this before. That was different. A performance for others. This felt more intimate somehow, more consequential. His hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch gentle. It's still a performance way. Just practice, remember? But when his lips met mine, it didn't feel like practice. Unlike our courthouse peck, this kiss was warm and lingering. His mouth moved against mine with careful skill, teaching without words. I found myself responding instinctively, my hands sliding from his shoulders to the nape of his neck, fingers threading through his hair. When we finally separated, his pupils were dilated, his breathing slightly uneven. Was that authentic enough? He asked, his voice huskier than usual. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We should get some sleep, he said, standing abruptly. Big day tomorrow? That night, lying in bed alone, I replayed the kiss in my mind, examining my reaction with the same analytical precision I applied to laboratory results. The increased heart rate could be attributed to anxiety about the upcoming interview. The lingering physical response could be simple biology. I was a 30-year-old man with normal hormonal functions. What I couldn't explain away was the sense of rightness I'd felt in Ethan's arms. The feeling that I'd finally found something I'd been searching for without knowing it was missing. The immigration interview was both better and worse than I'd anticipated. The officer, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Nast Garcia, was professional but thorough, her eyes sharp behind rimless glasses as she reviewed our documentation. You have an impressive paper trail, she observed. Joint bank accounts, shared lease, plenty of photographs. Everything very orderly. Way's good at details, Ethan said, his hand resting casually on mine. I'm more of the spontaneous type, so I gather. She reviewed her notes. Mr. Russell, you're a musician? That seems an unlikely match for a doctoral candidate in biochemical engineering. Love doesn't follow logical patterns, he replied easily. But actually, there's more overlap than you might think. Music and science both require creativity, pattern recognition, discipline. His fingers squeezed mine slightly. Way helps me structure my chaos. I help him remember to look up from his research occasionally. She made a non-committal noise, then turned to me. Mr. Zhang, what attracted you to Mr. Russell? Specifically. The question caught me off guard despite our preparation. I'd expected factual questions, not emotional ones. His persistence, I began, falling back on our practice story. But as I looked at Ethan, something else emerged. And his kindness. He notices things most people don't. When I'm stressed, when I haven't eaten, when I need silence. He brings beauty and spontaneity into a life that was perhaps too ordered. The words felt pulled from somewhere deep and true, surprising even me. Mrs. Garcia watched our exchange carefully. Mr. Russell, does your family approve of your marriage? Ethan's smile tightened slightly. My mom loves Wei. My dad is coming around. He's traditional in certain ways. And your family, Mr. Zhang? I tensed. They know I'm married, yes. That wasn't my question. Ethan's hand tightened on mine as I struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't betray us. Wei's parents haven't been able to visit yet, Ethan interjected smoothly. They know we're married, but explaining a son-in-law wasn't exactly in their plans. We're giving them time to adjust to the idea. The truth was more complicated. My parents knew I was married to an American, which they cautiously approved of for the immigration benefits and potential career opportunities. But they believed Ethan was Emily, a fiction I'd created because I couldn't face telling them their only son had married a man, even if it was supposedly just for papers. Mrs. Garcia nodded, making another note. I'd like to speak with each of you separately now. The individual questioning was intensive, but not the disaster I'd feared. Our answers aligned on all the critical details. When we were reunited, Mrs. Zhang, Garcia's expression gave nothing away. Your case will be reviewed, and you'll be notified of the decision. If approved, Mr. Zhang will receive conditional permanent residency valid for 2 years. Before that period ends, you'll need to apply for the conditions to be removed. She closed her folder. Do you have any questions? We shook our heads. Then we're finished for today. Thank you both for your time. Outside the federal building, Ethan let out a long breath. That went well, right? I think so. I loosened my tie, suddenly exhausted. You were very convincing. So were you. He studied me thoughtfully. Especially that part about my kindness. That wasn't in our script. Improvisation, I said quickly. She seemed to respond better to emotional content than facts. He nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. Smart thinking. We should have been celebrating, but instead an odd melancholy settled between us as we made our way home. Something had shifted during that interview, a line crossed between performance and truth that neither of us seemed ready to acknowledge. 3 weeks later, my conditional green card arrived in the mail. According to our plan, we would now begin establishing separate lives while maintaining the appearance of marriage for official purposes. Ethan would stay in the apartment, but spend more time with friends, creating a gradual separation that would eventually lead to an amicable divorce once my permanent status was secured. Instead, we found ourselves continuing much as before, sharing meals, watching movies together, talking late into the night. Neither of us mentioned the upcoming separation, as if by tacit agreement we decided to postpone the inevitable. The change came unexpectedly on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I defended my dissertation successfully that afternoon, the culmination of years of work, the achievement that had driven me to pursue our fraudulent marriage in the first place. I should have been elated. Instead, I returned to the apartment feeling strangely hollow, uncertain what came next now that my primary goal had been achieved. Ethan was waiting with champagne and takeout from my favorite Sichuanese restaurant. Dr. Zhang, he greeted me with a proud smile. I knew you'd nail it. Thank you. I accepted the glass he offered, oddly touched by his thoughtfulness. You didn't have to do all this. Of course I did. It's not every day my husband becomes a doctor. He raised his glass. To the most brilliant biochemical engineer I know, who also happens to be a pretty decent fake spouse. The joke landed like a stone in my stomach. Fake spouse. Of course, that's what I was, what we were to each other. A convenient fiction that had served its purpose and would soon end. Hey, Ethan said softly, noticing my expression. What's wrong? I thought you'd be over the moon. I insisted, taking a large swallow of champagne. It's just been a long day. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, but he didn't press. Instead, he served the food and kept the conversation light, telling me about a student's creative interpretation of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star that had the other teachers in tears of laughter. I tried to engage, to match his enthusiasm, but something inside me had shifted, a recognition I couldn't ignore any longer. I received a job offer, I said abruptly, interrupting his story. A research position at Shanghai Medical University. Prestigious, well-funded. Exactly what I've been working toward. His smile faltered. That's in China. Yes. When would you start? 3 months from now? I stared at my plate. It would mean accelerating our timeline. Filing for divorce sooner. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. Is that what you want? He finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. It's a logical next step. I couldn't bring myself to answer his actual question. My parents would be proud. I'd be closer to family. That's not what I asked, Wei. He set down his fork. Do you want to go back to China? Do you want to end this arrangement? I looked up, meeting his gaze, seeing the question behind the question. Do you want to end us? I don't know, I admitted, the closest to honesty I could manage. This was never supposed to be real, Ethan. We agreed from the beginning. Things change, he said quietly. People change. Into what? A musician and a research scientist from completely different cultures? A relationship built on fraud? I pushed back from the table, suddenly unable to sit still. My parents don't even know you're a man. I'm aware, he said, his voice going tight. Just like I'm aware that you've never once introduced me to any of your academic colleagues or friends. Because it's complicated. Because you're ashamed, he cut in. Not just of a fake marriage, but of being with a man at all. Of being who you actually are. His words hit with precision accuracy, exposing the truth I'd been avoiding for months, possibly years. I'm not gay, I said, the denial automatic. Maybe not, he acknowledged. Maybe you're bi like me. Or maybe you're straight and I'm just a bizarre exception. But what we have, Wei, what's grown between us, that's not fake. Not anymore. I wanted to deny it, to retreat behind logic and practicality and cultural differences. But I was tired of lying, especially to myself. I don't know how to do this, I confessed, my voice barely audible. Any of this, being with a man, disappointing my family, building a life so different from what I planned. Ethan stood and crossed to where I stood, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel his warmth. No one knows how to do it, he said gently. We figure it out as we go, making mistakes, learning, growing. Together. And if it doesn't work? If we're too different? Then at least we tried something real instead of hiding behind what's safe. His hand came up to cup my cheek, just as it had that night we practiced kissing. Take the job if it's what you truly want. Go back to China if that's where you'll be happiest. But don't run away from this, from us, because you're scared. I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch. I paid you to marry me for a green card, I reminded him. That's hardly a romantic beginning. I don't know, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. It's a pretty good story. How did you meet? Oh, I bought him. A startled laugh escaped me. Ethan. Wei. His voice softened. I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking for honest. For real. Whatever that looks like for us. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me with such openness, such vulnerability, that something inside me finally surrendered. I kissed him then, not as practice, not as performance, but as myself. A man who had spent his entire life planning and calculating and controlling, finally letting go. When we separated, he rested his forehead against mine. So, Shanghai, huh? I haven't accepted yet, I said. There's also a position at the university here. Less prestigious, but closer to certain things I've come to value. Such as? Decent Chinese food? reasonable rent, a husband who isn't just on paper. His smile was like sunrise. I might be persuaded to consider a real long-term arrangement, though I should warn you, my rates have gone up. Turns out I'm a pretty good fake husband. I think I can afford it, I said, pulling him closer. Though I should warn you, my parents will expect grandchildren eventually. He laughed. One major life adjustment at a time, Dr. Zhang. 3 days later I called my parents. The conversation was difficult, filled with confusion, hurt, and questions I didn't have perfect answers for. It ended with uncertainty, but not rejection. A beginning, if not the acceptance I hoped would come with time. After, Ethan held me as I processed the complex emotions, neither minimizing the cultural gulf I was attempting to bridge, nor allowing me to retreat behind it. 2 weeks later, I formally accepted the local research position and began the process of building a life I hadn't planned but increasingly couldn't imagine living without. 6 months later, when our fraudulent marriage would have been winding down according to my original timeline, we invited friends to a small ceremony, a renewal of vows that was, in truth, our first genuine exchange of promises. I paid him to marry me for a green card, I admitted to the gathered guests, Ethan's hand warm in mine. But in the end, citizenship wasn't what I wanted to keep. The journey ahead would be complex, navigating cultural differences, family expectations, the ordinary challenges of any relationship made extraordinary by our unusual beginning. But as I watched Ethan laugh with my visiting university colleagues, as I imagined our future unfolding in ways I'd never dared to consider, I was certain of one thing: some frauds lead to the most authentic truths if we're brave enough to recognize them.